Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Miami MoCAAD, Museum of Contemporary Art of the African Diaspora, Afro Latinx Creative Conversation Series. Today is the second in the series. My name is Corbin Graves, and I'm the Interactive Media Director for Miami MoCAAD. I will start by thanking all of you for joining this evening, and I'm going to lead with some of our individual donors to Miami MoCAAD. Thank you to Joe, Betty, Kate Fleming, Dorothy Terrell, John Shubin, Keith, and Renetta Ward Family Foundation, Michael Simpkins, L&S Gallery. Your continued support goes to paid internships and makes art events like this possible. Thank you. Speaking of donations, Miami MoCAAD is again participating in the Give Miami Day 2021 fundraising opportunity. The Give Miami Day is one of the nation's largest 24-hour annual giving events. We invite you and everyone you know to support Miami MoCAAD during the early giving period, November 15th through the 17th, and on Give Miami Day, November 18th. Your support will help Miami MoCAAD to continue to make more innovative and exciting experiences. Now, with a little information about Miami MoCAAD and Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County is an extraordinary place and is a center of an ever-growing arts ecosystem and is uniquely positioned at the crossroads of continents and cultures. In this section, our interns will be posting the links to Miami MoCAAD social media and the website in the chat. If you want to follow us, please look there for our information. This is where Miami MoCAAD comes in. Miami MoCAAD's goal is to create new and innovative and creative ways to create community, networks, novel context for identities, and creative ways to experience museums. Miami MoCAAD, the Museum of Contemporary Art of the African Diaspora, will blend art and technology and cross boundaries to bring exciting, compelling, and memorable experiences that connect people and communities, locally, nationally, and globally. Today's conversation is titled Continuamos, and continuing from the slave trade to building the Americas, the revelations of untold truths, inspire and empower. I want to introduce today's presenter, Orlando Addison, award-winning author and convener of the first Miami Afro-Latino Heritage Excellence Summit, and Yvette Rodriguez, the founder of Afro-Latinos Professionals of Miami, as our moderator. A recording will be posted on our YouTube channel a few days after this conversation. The link will be posted in the chat. There will be a Q&A portion to the conversation, and we would love to hear from you. Please send your questions in the Zoom chat or the Facebook Live chat. Our interns, Ashley Caleb, Kristen Allen, will send them along to the Q&A moderator intern. The Q&A moderator intern, Luz Estrella Cruz. After the Q&A, we'll all have a short post conversation talk where everyone will be able to be upgraded to panelists. This is to allow everybody to have a chance to speak to our team, as well as to speak to the speaker and the moderator in a more intimate setting. This will happen after the conversation. Closing remarks will be made by Marilyn Hollyfield, partner at Holland & Knight International Law Firm and co-founder of Miami MoCAAD. Again, thank you to those of you joining us this evening, and welcome to Miami MoCAAD's second of our creative conversation series, focusing on the Afro-Latinx experience, Continuamos, and continuing from the slave trade to the building of the Americas, and revelations of untold truths, inspire and empower. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Orlando, how are you? Thank you so much, Corbin. I'm so happy to be back with you, Orlando. I have my tea here ready to go, waiting for you to drop some more, enlightenment, some knowledge of our history, the Black next people. Part one of the creative conversations, you enlightened us speaking about the history of the philosophers who coined the terms Black and how it became like a negative thing and, dark is bad or whatever. And we're back for part two, thankfully, and of this fantastic 4-part series, Y Continuamos, and continuing from the slave trade to building the Americas. And Orlando, I feel like a lot of people are not aware of that Black Latinos even exist. And I mean, of course, I'm a Black Latino person, and much less do they know the information about how they helped build, the world. Luckily, we have you, to help us out with that. So let me start off by asking you, if you can please explain to us, what were the roles that Africans played during the exploration of the New World?
Thank you, Yvette. It's so nice to be back and to be with you. And thank you to Miami MoCAAD, a creative conversation, for again providing us with the platform that so that we can share all this information. Just a disclaimer, I mean, I'm not a historian, but I just love to read and do some research and the Afro-Latino community just to learn about our ancestors, particularly some of the positive areas that are not been exposed to us and to the general public. So to answer your question, I would say that many people in Latin America and even here in the United States and around the world are unaware that more than 500 Africans participated in the establishment of the Spanish colonies. Now, the first Africans that arrived in the New World from Spain, they were soldiers, and some of them were servants, others were slaves, and others were settlers. Now, these Africans that lived in Spain, a couple of them, many of them were not slaves. They had the opportunity to get educated. They even learned the language. They learned to speak Spanish. They received some kind of education. Those who were slaves, the concept of slaves in Europe is not the same, or was not the same concept that we have today. When you think of slavery, you have the tendency to think of Black people. But in Europe, it was completely different. Anyone could be slaves. In fact, according to historians, there were white people, Europeans, who were enslaved as well.
Right.
So the concept here is completely, in terms of understanding the definition of slavery, just to label Black people as slaves is completely wrong, because anyone in Europe was slave. But then again, those who came to the New World came looking for some kind of adventure. Many saw the opportunity to cross the Atlantic Ocean, to see the New World, to better their lives, to better their financial situation. Africans who set out for the New World contributed significantly, which is something that many of us ignored or don't know, particularly to building the colonial society here. So they played an integral part of Spanish explorers back then. So yes, many Africans came with the conquistadores, with the Spaniards, particularly after Christopher Columbus came over to this new land on October 12th, 1492. And after that, he opened up the doors, the gate, let's put it this way, for Europeans to come over. And that's how the conquistadores came to the New World and brought these Africans with them.
Interesting. And yeah, growing up, in school, they would always talk about the conquistadores, etc. Of course, Christopher Columbus, but of course, there was Africans in the picture too. So then, thank you for mentioning that. Can you tell us who some of these Africans were, just to have a name?
Oh, of course, yes. There's several of them, but I'm just going to mention few of them. And I think if we can go to slide 3, we will look there as one of the first one, which is Juan Garrido. Juan Garrido was considered or named, or at least he's been identified as one of the African conquistadores. And when I learned this, oh my God, it was so nice and beautiful. And it was, my heart just jumped with joy to know that we had a brother, an African, doing exactly the same thing, but because of racism and discrimination, his name was set aside. But thank God for researchers and scholars such as Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., to which, by the way, I would ask everyone to look at the documentary that Dr. Henry Gates Jr. did, which is called Black in Latin America. It's a wonderful documentary.
Excellent.
Yes,
Excellent.
Yes, it's excellent with a lot of information. For those of you who are exploring and want to know more about the Black community in Latin America, this is a wonderful way. So yes, check out Dr. Henry Gates Jr.'s documentary on Black in Latin America. You will learn a lot there. But anyway, he was the one that basically did some of the research together with other historians about Juan Garrido, and believed that he came in the early 1500s with some of the Spaniards, some of the conquistadores, and established here in the new land, in the Americas. Now, according to him, to Dr. Gates Jr., his first trip to the territory dominated by Spain was in 1503. And then, of course, he had other trips that he came back to the New World. But this first trip took place actually 11 years after Christopher Columbus arrived for the first time in the New World. So 11 years after that, Juan Garrido came behind Christopher Columbus with other conquistadores. Now, the picture that you're seeing there, I'm not personally, I'm not quite sure if that's a depiction of him. And I'm not quite sure also that he would be dressed that way, because according again to historians, there were many Blacks who were part of, who were soldiers, were recruited to be soldiers for the Spanish crown. So maybe Juan Garrido was a soldier. Maybe he, was dressed properly, not in the way that it's been depicted, like right. Like the picture there, which looks like like a slave, runaway slave, or something like that. But he was a conquistador. He also traveled with Hernan Cortez to Mexico. So he was perhaps one of the first Africans to put, feet on Mexican ground at the time. He was accompanied the explorer Ponce de Leon, who also was the governor of the Dominican Republic today, which is the island of Hispaniola, which is Dominican Republic and Haiti. And he decided then to explore the nearby island, which is Puerto Rico. And also, which is interesting about Ponce de Leon, he had this idea, this concept of that the indigenous people or the native people or somewhere, he will find this fountain of youth. And so he went to Puerto Rico, thinking about that, to find this fountain of youth, and then moved also to Mexico, where Juan Garrido joined him in that expedition there. And unfortunately, he was wounded and perished in the land, seeking for not only treasure but also seeking for the fountain of youth. I wish you could find it. I mean, I need some of that myself.
You're good, I think.
And many others. But he also traveled to Florida, which is a very interesting thing because he's not mentioned. And remember, Florida was not part of the United States. Florida became part of the United States years later. But Juan Garrido was the first one to come to Florida. So he's the first Black person to enter into what we call today the United States. So the history of the African presence in the United States, which is that you learn that in 1619, for example, in Jamestown, Virginia, and Massachusetts, when a group of Africans came to the continental United States, they were not the first African in this part of the world. Latin America already had thousands, maybe millions of them enslaved by the time 1619, the year 1619, and by the time the Africans came to the United States. So this is an important historical data that I think people need to look into as well. So his last expedition was in Baja California with Hernan Cortez in 1533. He received excellent compensation for his work, for his expedition, for his conquest. And because of that, he was remunerated for all that he did with Hernan Cortez and Ponce de Leon. He used that compensation to buy land, so he bought land, and also he owned mines. So that means that this brother, Juan Garrido, was not poor. He was, perhaps in the upper middle class society at the time. He also owned slaves, unfortunately, but not only African slaves. According to some historians, he may have owned also indigenous or the native people who the conquistadores defeated in battle. When they tried to take away the native people's land. So he owned slaves. He owned the mine. He owned land. And then later on, he was hired to work. He was an employee of the city of Mexico. So he was the first one to be hired. And when the city of Mexico was reorganized and started to govern in the land, he died then in 1536. And then his story just disappeared from the book of history. And again, we believe, together with other historians, other scholars, and people like myself, believe that it was intentional that they removed his name and his action from the book of histories. And let's go to slide 4. And then we'll see there, this is another individual. His name is Estebanico el Negro, Estebanico the Black, to translate el Negro into English. He was from Morocco. He was a slave. He was slaves in Spain and traveled with his slave owner to the new land. And once he was here, he basically accompanied Pamphilo de Narvaez, who also was the conqueror of Cuba, and also he, together with Estebanico el Negro, came to Florida. So we have another African who stepped foot here in Florida at the time in the early 1500s and the early time of the conquistadores to Florida. So we have two individuals, Juan Garrido and Estebanico el Negro, both of them, considered to be the first Africans to come into in contact with the New World, and also who are considered to be conquistadores as well.
Wow. No, super interesting. Things that we don't hear, that I'd never learned in history books in school, to be quite honest with you.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Orlando, let me ask you, what about the ladies? Were there any African women who helped? You know how they say there's always a woman standing behind or beside a strong man, there's always a strong woman. What about the African women? Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's understand that was a period in which it was a patriarchal. So that means that it was male dominated, right? So there were also few women at that time who came with the conquistadores. But among the few that came, and if we go to slide 5, you'll see among the few that came is someone whose name is Isabelle De Olveda. And Isabelle De Olveda, her father was African, and her mother, according to, again, to some of the research they've done, was a native of the land at that time. So she was basically contributed indirectly with the colonies, with the Spanish colonies. indirectly means that, again, because being a female at the time, she may have been, and she was a servant, she may perhaps cook the meal or ran errands or prepare, the home for meetings, those kind of situations. So that's how she was able to be involved in the, with the conquistadores and establishing the Spanish colonies here in the New World. We also have others, exactly, thank you. That's Sebastian Toral. And Sebastian Toral has a very interesting story. And Sebastian Toral, he's also an African. He was enslaved in Spain, came over with his master to the New World, and he basically went to the area of Mexico, particularly in the area of Yucatan. That was perhaps in between 1530 and 1540. Now, he fought along Francisco de Montejo in the conquest of the Mayans in Yucatan. One of the fascinating things about Sebastian Toral is that Sebastian Toral not only learned or knew his native language, from Africa, but he also learned Spanish as well. But here's the thing that he did for the conquistador, and this is something that just blew my mind, because this individual, this brother, was also able to learn to speak the Mayan language, and he became the interpreter between the Mayans and the Spanish conquistadores, translated back and forth with them. He actually ended up marrying a woman from the Mayan civilization, had families and children with her. But he was bright. He was brilliant to be able to speak all those languages and learn them so quick, so fast, like that. So we are privileged to have someone like Sebastian Toral, who helped have the conversation or the negotiation between the Spanish soldiers and the Mayans and vice versa. So this is an individual that we need to learn more about, because his what he did was a positive thing for the conquistadores to achieve the land, particularly in Mexico. And yes, if you can go to the other, to the next slide, please, that would be great. Juan Valiente. And remember, these are names that we're giving to the Africans. So Juan Valiente is not his original name, not his African name. And I think it's important to clarify this. Valiente here meant that he was owned by the Valiente family. So he would go to a different plantation, for example, or someone would find him, wandering around. They would ask him for his name, and once he mentioned Valiente, they will know that he knew that he was, belonged to the Valiente family. So they gave him the first name and last name. So he was from West Africa and was sent to Mexico, where he was bought by Alonso Valiente, that gave him the last name. And Alonso Valiente was a cousin of Hernan Cortez, the conqueror of Mexico. So he was baptized as a Christian at the time, and after the exploration in Mexico and other places, he returned to Spain with his master. Now, while he was in Spain, he then decided to ask the authority and ask the people that he knew to sign documentation to prove that he was part of the conquistadores, that he did a job in helping the conquistadores conquer the land for the king and queen of Spain, and did that. And he was summoned to the court in Spain, in Madrid, and he was able to defend himself. And later on, of course, they granted him permission to where he obtained his freedom. He also became, according to the research I did, one of the first fundraiser, because he was able to raise money to buy his own freedom. And by buying his own freedom, he then decided then that he would come back to the New World as a free man and as a conquistador. And he joined forces there with Pedro de Alvarado, who was the one responsible for conquering the country of Guatemala. Then later on, after that, he traveled down to Chile. He joined forces there with Pedro de Valdivia, who is the founder of Santiago de Chile and also Concepcion de Chile. He settled in Chile, married Juana de Valdivar. She was also an African who obtained her freedom as well. And so both of them got together, they married and have children. And Juan Valiente acquired land and part of his payment for his work in the field. But also important to mention that after the crown, the Spanish crown, which we'll see in a few minutes, authorized the Portuguese and the Spaniards to traffic with Africans so that they can be enslaved, Juan Valiente lost everything. Everything. Wow. His land, his home, everything was taken away from him. And according to researchers and historians, he died homeless because of that, just because he was Black. He was basically doing pretty good financially back then before the concept of enslaving Africans came in. But then he died. I mean, he became poor and homeless and died that way, unfortunately.
What a story! What a history of a person and a people. But let me ask you, what about the people the natives who already inhabited, the land? What happened to them, and with the presence of the Africans, were they affected?
Yes. Well, yeah. This is a very sad story because when the conquistadores came over, they basically defeated many of the tribes and civilizations that were already part of the land here, like the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas down in Peru, and many other small indigenous communities. And because these groups were defeated, they turned them into slaves. And so the African presence came after the fact that many of the local indigenous people were dying because they were doing work that they did not do before, and so they died because of the work they did, and also because of the disease that the European brought to the land. So there was a shortage of labor at the time when the conquistadores and the colony with the Spanish and the Portuguese were building the colonies here in the new land. And so they decided then to use and replace the indigenous community, the native, with Africans at the time. So let's go to the next slide. We'll see that we have here a very interesting story, and that is the story of how the Africans basically came into as slaves into the new land. So the idea then of introducing Africans to the continent came particularly from many slave advocates who were pushing this idea of replacing the indigenous people with Africans because they believed that Africans were stronger, that they were already accustomed to the environment, the tropical environment, that they were, good to work in the mining industry and also to work in the plantation. So this was a concept that was already going around at the time. And so the church got involved in this. And so Fray Bartolomé de las Casas got somehow trapped into this idea as well. And he then wrote a petition to the Queen and King of Spain, asking to send Africans who were already living in Spain to the colonies, to the New World, so that they can work as slaves and replace the indigenous people. He felt so sorry, and of course he was, because of the way they were dying and the way they were treated, the condition in which they were living. He felt so sad for the indigenous people that he believed that replacing them with Africans would save the indigenous people. But Fray Bartolomé de las Casas repented later for that statement. By the time he tried to change things around, the transatlantic slave trade was already in motion. It was already an economic situation. A lot of people were, and industry, they were gaining a lot of money from it. The ships who were traveling the African from Africa to the New World, they were already getting a lot of money for transporting, these men, women, and children. And at the same time, the owners of the land and those who owned mined and plantation, they were already also profiting from having Africans in the area. So Fray Bartolomé de las Casas was unable to stop that. Of course, he became a bishop later on, but he died really fighting to change that concept, that understanding of changing that original idea of replacing the native with Africans. So that's basically the idea in terms of how Africans came into this concept of becoming slaves in the Spanish American as well.
Right. Wow.
One thing also which is important, since we're talking about the church aspect of it, is that prior to that, on January 8th, 1455, Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull, which is the official statement of the Vatican, particularly to the Portuguese crown, in which the church instructed the crown that they were allowed to enslave Africans, and not only enslave them, but also to use them as merchandise. This is coming from the head of the church making that statement. John Paul II, I think was in the 1980s or something like that, when he traveled to Africa, he then publicly made a public statement and asked the African community to forgive the church for making this statement, and for all the statements that the church made during the slave period, in which Africans, men, women, and children were treated in an inhumane way. So that's how the church got involved in this, and how the church today has been asking for forgiveness for its participation in this inhumane trafficking.
Well, that's a start, I guess.
Yes.
Orlando, let me ask you, and as far as what ignited this whole European human trafficking of Africans, from the continent, what was their mission there?
Well, one again, they wanted to replace the indigenous people, and so as I mentioned before, but also because Europe was going through a financial crisis at the time. Particularly the Spanish crown owned a lot of money, and was in debt and needed some financial resources to continue, to continue governing and also to continue in power. So they depended on producing and importing goods, particularly gold, silver, and as well as sugar cane, which was produced here in the land. And so when the economic situation got worse, they saw then the opportunity, because they needed labor, they needed people to help produce all these, gold, silver, and sugarcane. So when the idea came to replace the native with the Africans, that was something that the Crown saw as a financial opportunity, and then opened up an entire gates and doors for the trafficking of Blacks into the New World. So that's what basically created, the traffic and the financial crisis that took place, and also caused a labor crisis too that the colonies were experiencing right here in the New World.
Wow. And let me ask you, what about like in Latin America, like all this trafficking of Africans, like how did it affect like the different Spanish like settlements in Latin America?
Well, yeah, one is that the Spanish crown, the king in Spain, authorized the transportation of Africans to the New World on January 22nd, 1510. And that day, the Spanish crown gave the stamp, the authorization, saying it's okay, it's no longer illegal to transport Africans to the New World, but I'm making it legal for you to do exactly that, to go to kidnap the men, women, and children in Africa and bring them over, and you have my blessing, my permission, to do exactly that. So that started January 22nd, 1510, when the king and queen gave the authorization to do exactly that. Now, according to historians and scholars, believe that, and of course the United Nations made the statement that over 12.5 million men, women, and children were enslaved in Latin America. 12 million. Now, other scholars argue that perhaps that number is higher, might be higher than the official number. Why? Because some scholars say that they were other companies and ships that were trafficking illegally with Africans as well. So these illegal trafficking of Africans were not recorded. So they believe that because they were not recorded, they believe that the numbers might be higher than the 12.5 million men, women, and children that came to this land. If we go then to the next slide, I think it's slide 11, we can see in terms of just look in terms of how these men and women were treated. Remember, they were treated as animals.
Right.
These men and women were treated as merchandise. So they were viewed as a product, so they had no mercy on them. So they treated them as objects, not as human beings. And so they were put on chains and carried in different ways. Sometimes they even starved because they didn't feed them, or they didn't give them water to drink, those kind of things. Let's go to the next slide so we can just quickly and see. This is a way in terms of how the Africans were captured and put on the ships and taken all the way down, where they will be, like you saw in the first slide there, the 2 slides before this one, they will be placed and lied on their side so that they can fit more men and women and even children in on the ship, to have more cargo in there. Now this is a way of branding. When I see this is just horrible. you know, they treated them as cattle, as cows, as animals. You know, they marked them and branded them with the owner's initials on their backs. I mean, and this was hot iron, you know, placed on the back, which would just damage the flesh by doing so. That was the way how the conquistadores treated the Africans. The one on the left, you'll see that's a picture that has gone around the world, I believe, and you can see the marks that not only this brother, but many like him experienced during slavery. And then remember, Africans were not viewed as human. They were basically merchandise, you know? So no one there was able to intervene to stop that from happening, because that was a way of building the economy of the colonies, and also, you know, helping the crown in Spain and in Portugal become rich and stable, and you know, and to have all the luxury that they were living at the time.
Free labor, everything free. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The free labor, yes. And here's another picture that shows how women were humiliated. Slaves, women, and even men as well. But you can see in the picture the individual laughing, you know, and see have a smile on his face, and it was terrible. I mean, slavery was terrible for our brothers and sisters. So, you know, and this is also important to bring to the attention to all of us, is that our brothers and sisters, men, women, and children went through all this humiliation. And I think it's important for us today, we who now are living in free societies, to really work hard to, you know, to come together, to work together, and to build our community and communities in such a way that we can, that they, our ancestors, can be and feel proud of us, and we can feel proud of them and say to them, you know, your sacrifices were not in vain. You know, because here we are, you know.
Look at us.
Yes, exactly, building a society. But we are here, you and I, and many Black people in Latin America and here in the United States, we are here because of the people like that lady who has been humiliated, and many others who experience inhumane treatment like that.
No, we have to recognize. And this is, you're doing great, you know, this is recognition of, you know, the horrors and also the advancements, you know, despite of.
That is true. That is true. Let's go to the next slide, please, and see what we have there on the next slide. The other one would show, I believe, you know, some of the trafficking of the Africans into the New World, and the way that they not only treated, but, you know, with the chain all over their necks, and naked, almost naked, all that stuff. So again, the number of men and women that came to, that not came because they didn't do it voluntarily, but they were brought to the New World, basically, again, was over 12.5 million, according to the United Nations. 26% of the people that were brought to be enslaved were children. 26%, according to researchers, were children. That's amazing. So they had no mercy on these people. It didn't matter if it was men, you know, women, children. That did not matter. All that mattered at the time was they viewed them as money. They viewed them as merchandise, and they were captured for that. All right, let's go to the next one, and that is this shows that in Mexico, for example, it estimated that 32,000 Africans were brought to Mexico, particularly in the first half of the 17th century. Most of it was, they were located in Veracruz, in Puebla, and Oaxaca, Mexico. And I'm so glad to see that our brothers and sisters, Mexican or Black Mexican or Afro Mexicans, are really organizing and showing people that yes, they are Black people in Mexico, you know. And I was also glad to hear that I think the government lately recognized and included the Afro Mexican into or recognized as people, as indigenous people, which they were not recognized before that. So they were completely ignored. And you know, people used to say, well, what happened to the Black people in Mexico? And you would not, you know, the people would say, well, they don't exist. We don't have them.
Right.
You know, they would hide them so that people would not see that they were there. So 32,000 Africans came there to Mexico at the time. And Cuba received 715,000 Africans. This is more than the number of people that African that came to the United States. You know, the United States, there were 388,000 that total Africans that are enslaved that came to the United States. But look at Cuba. Cuba had 715,000. Again, these are numbers that were registered and that scholars and historians were able to, and researchers were able to find. But again, you have to understand that there were more, perhaps more than that, because they didn't count the ones that came illegal, that they were brought illegal to these areas. So the next slide, please. We have Colombia. Colombia received more than 80,000 Africans, and most of them in Cartagena, Buenaventura. You have the Palenqueros there in Colombia. Palenqueros, a group of Africans who runaway slaves, perhaps, and build these different communities to protect themselves and to run away from their owners and those who were seeking them. And so they built all these communities. Similar situation happened also in Brazil, in the favelas, and in Ecuador, they same thing in Esmeraldas, where a lot of the Africans who were enslaved ran away and established all these communities in these places. So Colombia received 80,000, the African men, women, and children as well, and that's one of the reasons why you have the presence of Africans there and African descendants in Colombia. Costa Rica also received about 1,000, perhaps even more than that. The English-speaking community there came later, years later, but it said, according to historians, about 1,000 of the Africans were introduced to Costa Rica. Honduras, my country, where I was born, it received over 2,000 Africans as well. This is according to George Reed Andrews, who was able to put the data. Argentina received 34,000 Africans. Now, yeah, 34,000 Africans. Now, Argentina is a country that for centuries, for decades, has been denying the existence of Black people there.
Right.
Even today, some of the brothers and sisters are still treated as invisible. You know, they're not brought to the light so that people can see them, because they still, some part of the government still deny their existence. So Argentina received a lot of these African men and women as slaves, and even in the independent part of Argentina. Later, when the country was consolidated and became, you know, a republic, the government decided then to isolate them, to just put up, to cover them up, you know, to hide them, because they felt that Black people were ashamed. The Argentinians were ashamed to have Black people on their territory. So as you can see, that's the number that that Argentina received. Puerto Rico, 51,265. This is according to Jose Vasquez, an historian who presented that particular data. The next slide, this is Brazil. Brazil is very interesting because Brazil received, listen to this now, 4 million African men, women, and children as slaves during the period of 1500, 1888, when they abolished slavery, 1888, 1886, as some scholars will say. But 4 million in Africans. So Brazil then is considered to be the country with the most number of Africans outside of the continent, the African continent. So, and that's again, you in Brazil you'll see a huge number of people with dark skin and mulattas as well, living in Brazil. So yeah, that's a huge number of people in that particular area. Also, Brazil, as I mentioned before, did not comply with other countries abolishing slavery. So it was the last country to do so. But because of pressure, it was pressured to allow Black people to be free. But also Brazil did something very interesting too. Well, maybe not, the word interesting might not be appropriate here, but what Brazil did when declared, when it abolished slavery, did exactly similar to what Argentina did, ignored the Black people. And we will talk a little bit about that in our next conversation when we talk about the reason why many of the Black people in Latin America lived in poverty and in very poor situations where lack of education and infrastructure, all that we'll talk about in our next conversation. But this shows Brazil was received one of the highest number of slaves. Guayaquil in Ecuador received 2,226 in 1790. This again, according to historian John Anton Sanchez, who did that particular study. And here again, the United States, as I mentioned, 388,000 Africans came to the United States. Compare that with Cuba, over 700,000. Compare that with Brazil, 4 million that came to Brazil. Compare that to the La Isla Española, the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So the number of Africans that came to the United States, basically very low in comparison with numbers that were already in Latin America.
Super interesting. Let me ask you, we can talk about this forever. I want to get deep, one of our last questions. I'm going to read it just as is because I want to get it just right.
Sure. I
want to know, how does knowledge of the presence of Africans in the Americas back in the 1500s inform our present?
Good question.
What do you
Very good question. And what comes to mind with that question is this song that I think Marley's son, Gigi Marley, I think is his name. One of the songs that he says, if you don't know your past, you don't know your future. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to learn the past of our ancestors, the past of Africans, not only in terms of learning about slavery, but also, what these men and women did. Right. One thing that is very important that we need to keep in mind is that many of the Latin American countries are financially stable or were stable in the past because of the work, the sacrifices that many African men, women, and children did for free. So
Absolutely.
their labor, their work, helped build the economy of many of the Latin American countries. The sad thing about this is that these men and women have not been recognized by these nations. And it's now your responsibility, Yvette, my responsibility, and the responsibilities of all Black and African descendants in Latin America to make sure to take our voices to these governments, local governments, and institutions, and remind them, that the nations were built of the sacrifices of all our brothers and sisters, Africans, who were brought as slaves to serve these nations. And it's important that the countries recognize the contribution of these men and women, and to stop really isolating us. So we need to learn the history. We need to learn the past, so that the past can inform the present, and then we can move forward to the future and build, a future for the next generation, where they will not be discriminated, where they will participate, in the nation's construction, and in the all aspects of the nation, in politics, economy, just name it. So yes, it's important then to learn the past, so that it can inform the present, and we can be able to move to the future.
Absolutely, and we can't leave it up to history books. We have to, thankfully, like platforms like Miami MoCAAD, having these speaking, these things are really important. And this is, you have a lot to tell, to inform, to school on the knowledge, and part 2. So then there's 4 parts. You have to continue to support MoCAAD, follow them on all over the social media platforms, and etc. And just to continue the conversations. These creative conversations are very much needed.
Exactly. The other thing also, you said something very important in terms of history, is that, we also need to be careful in terms of reading history, because sometimes those who write history will write history according to their own understanding. Exactly. And so if we want the present generation and future generation to know the history of our people, we need to start writing our own history.
We have to.
And telling our own truth, right?
Right, writing it and telling it. Both things. Things. Because we cannot rely on, something online all the time, or written in books. Those can be it's put away. Those can be disappeared. But our history of our own families, even by you telling these things, it's it'll stick. It'll stick, and then we just have to continue to pass it down. Thank you, Orlando.
Yes. Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Yes. No, we're gonna open it up, I'm sure, pretty soon to Q&A.
There you go.
Very excited to hear what people have to say, or if anybody has any questions. And exactly, just to continue the conversation. I think we're gonna have a conversation. It's gonna open up a forum at the end. So I'm super excited about it.
Very good. Very good. So were you somehow there was something new for you about Cuba, when I mentioned like Ponce de Leon and others of the
of course, like I'm always learning. That's the thing, that like as far as like I'm living as a Black Latino person, but as far as like, it's very important also, because everybody knows Christopher Columbus, but we have to learn those people too, like the Blacks that were either right behind him, or like basically were side by side with him, or that, they were possibly conquistadores as well, or even the person who, like, he was like an interpreter, he learned like the native language. Those things are like, it's like, how did we come from, like, how are we here? Because we already had that power in us. It was, of course, like in everything in this world, things can be suppressed, but once we tell these stories, it's like, you know, it gives you like a different push. Like you'll start your day off a little bit different. You'll start like representing yourself a little bit different, carrying yourself a little bit differently, telling people like if somebody is trying to like suppress you, like, you know better now, kind of, you know better. And you can't, you know, they're not gonna win. How can they if you already know where you came from? There's no way.
That is so true, Yvette. That's so true. And, you know, for me, it's invigorating to know all this aspect of history that no one taught me. No, I didn't, you know, hear these information from my professors in high school or of the university. All I heard and read is that Black people were slaves. And that was it, you know, and then they presented all the negative, the negative stereotype of Blackness, but never taught us that, you know, wow, you know, there were also these other Africans who really contributed, you know,
absolutely
to build the nation as well.
Right.
Hello.
No, I'm thankful for that.
I'm gonna jump in real quick. So first off, Orlando, thank you so very much. So all the information that you gave us today was so good. We're gonna move the conversation to the Q&A section, and I'm gonna let Luz take over. So let's go ahead, Luz.
Hi everyone, my name is Luz and I'll be leading the Q&A section. So far we have one question for Orlando. What are some good resources for those who want to dig into their country's hidden histories?
Oh, good. As I mentioned before with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. with his documentary that was produced and I think it's PBS, you can go online and YouTube and just do some research of that. And he did, you know, documentary in almost all the countries in Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to Brazil. So those are ways that you can really get some of the information from your particular country or nation. You can also Google it. Look for, you know, materials and books that talked about particularly that relate to your nation, that they've been studies that they have done by scholars and researchers regarding the Africans in your particular community, in your particular country, and this way you can learn more. I think it's important for us to start reading, because the more we read, the more we research, the more we find, the better we will be prepared to stand up and to, you know, and share information with people and to correct people, you know, when they start sharing misinformation with us, because the misinformation seems to be the theme of the day today. So we have to look into, get the right information and share that information with people. So I would suggest looking into the documentary Black in Latin America. Do some other research. There are also books that you can read. You know, for example, you know, Black contemporary contemporary Africans in Latin America, or contemporary Afro-Latinos in Latin America. You can also have read, for example, in Puerto Rico, Slaves Revolt, and that was also a wonderful book that I read a couple months ago. That really just described in terms of how the slaves were, they fought, particularly, this is a very interesting one, once they heard about and found out, directly or indirectly, about the revolution in Haiti. And Haiti is going to be something else that we need to talk about. And we don't talk much about Haiti too. And Haiti played an important role with their independence in Latin America, and also for the Latin American countries to suppress more the Africans after they heard the independence of Haiti. So Slave Revolt in Puerto Rico is one book that I would recommend for you to read and to get some of the history that, again, you will not typically learned in academia, or at least in high school. Also, I would say that many universities are now incorporating Latin American studies. They have scholars now there that are doing wonderful job of research. If you want to learn also more about the Afro-Latino communities, those are places to go. They offer, I think, courses online to those interested in getting the true information about Africans and their descendants in Latin America. So there, like I said, there's so many ways that you can obtain materials. African Diaspora in Latin America is another book that I would recommend for you to read. I hope I answered your question.
Yes,
I haven't read all the books yet.
Yes, you have. And thanks to Charlie, another intern from Miami MoCAAD, some of the links to some of the things Mr. Addison was describing is in our chat. So please try and check that out and learn a little bit more about these histories. Someone had also asked, do you think Latino or Hispanic countries are doing better acknowledging the presence of Afro-Latinos in their own country?
I would say yes, but I'm cautious in responding, saying yes, because not all countries in Latin America are doing so. Thanks to the United Nations and to other organizations, they are bringing, awareness of the presence of Black Latinos and Afro-Latinos and the Afro-descendants in Latin America. Many countries are now celebrating, for example, Afro-Latin International Day, for example, that the United Nations was able to establish a few months ago. Many other countries are including or promoting, Black professionals to different areas. For example, in Costa Rica, the first, not only the first female to be vice president in Latin America, but it's the first Afro-Latino, Elsie Campbell, who have become the first vice president of Costa Rica. So there are some improvement. There are countries who are really looking into it, and but you also have others who are taking a very slow step to get there, and their reason for that slow step taking place. But the short answer is yes, countries in Latin America and governments are doing the best they can to do so, although they're not doing all that they should. But the community needs to get together, and remind the local government and the government of these nations that the Black community exists and the Black community needs to be recognized, as part of the government, as a part of the country.
Yeah.
Right.
Orlando, can I add that? Yeah, I was going to mention that the actual communities, the Black communities in these countries, to organize, to coordinate, just to meet your Afro-Latino neighbor, something like that. I created the Afro-Latino Professionals kind of because of that. Because I mean, obviously, I know a lot of Afro-Latinos. However, when it's like, okay, where are they? Where, as an entrepreneur, where they would ask, oh, where are the other Afro-Cubans at? Where is there a strong Afro-Cuban community in Miami? I'm like, absolutely. But then you cannot leave it up to the government to make a platform for you or whatever. You have to, it doesn't have to be anything too membership or anything like that. But I mean, just getting together, to being recognized. Remember when we had to you created a conference when there was an issue in Little Havana here in Miami for a production that had a character in blackface. You were like, hey, let's make, let's coordinate something let's talk to this company. And it was like, yeah, I'll reach out to my network. Let's get people out here. Let's, you know what I mean? We have to coordinate, but it was good that we have some, a directory, contacts of other the Latinx community, that it's like, when we need each other, we're there for each other. And that's in every community that needs to be that.
Yes, because, together we will be successful. Divided, right, we are not going to achieve the goal. Right. One of the things that I'm working on and I'm doing, I'm protesting basically, and it has to do with my book, El Actor y la Sombra, which hopefully it will be translated into English pretty soon. And that is to make a difference and to bring awareness to the telenovela production, to have more diverse actors and actresses in these entertainment events. So we can do that. We have the power to help change, and provide a new narrative into society, and not allowed. And I agree with you, Yvette, not allowed others to do it for us, because right, if we sit down and wait for others to do it for us, guess what? It's not going to happen. We need to take the leadership to make changes. And that's one of the things that I'm doing, is making changes, at least in the telenovelas, to see more Black faces, to see more Black actors and actresses, right, not only doing, negative stereotypes, right, like, servants and kind of, but being poor, but being professionals and being protagonists of these entertainment centers. So those are ways that we can start making some changes.
Yes, it's amazing that you mentioned that, because a follow-up question is, what are some ways that we can promote broader conversations like this? So it really sounds like organizing and finding a way to connect with the community on the ground, instead of looking towards government officials to give us that power back.
Yes, and that's true. And the other thing that I will add to that, which is important, is that we Black people, and it doesn't matter, African, Afro-Latinos and African Americans, we Black people need to come together. We need to unite. Because we just can't do things separately anymore. We can't divide ourselves. We just can't start competing with each other. We have to stop competing with each other and start uniting, coming together as one community, and build us up, so that we can be the community that our ancestors dreamed of. But if we continue dividing ourselves, and if we continue, competing with each other and bringing somebody else down because, he or she or that organization or the other one didn't do something good, and the other one is jealous because of that. No, we need to start supporting each other. So any event that you have that an Afro-Latino or African-American organization, like, for example, the Miami MoCAAD, for example, right, we can come together and assist and help and contribute, so that we can start uniting with each other. Because if we continue this division, we're not going to go anywhere. So one way to help the community move forward is coming together, supporting each other's events, assisting in any way, shape and form we can, so that we can, have a positive presence in society.
I agree.
Absolutely. Someone also asked, how can the school curriculum embrace more Afro-Latino history?
The school curriculum, we're talking about a school curriculum here in the United States or in Latin America?
It did not specify.
Specify. Okay, so here in the United States, I think, I'm not sure about this, but I have read very little, that they are somehow incorporating a little bit of the story and history into some of the curriculums here in the United States. I know, like as I mentioned before, some universities are really taking the lead in these areas. Some of the universities in Miami, I think FIU is one of them in Miami, that's doing a great job in terms of bringing scholars and with all this different knowledge of Black history and Afro-Latinos as well. So some schools are really working on it. In Latin America, that's a different story, though. I mean, I think the community, the Afro-Latino community, need to organize and perhaps they have meetings with authorities that have these that make these decisions in terms of what goes into the curriculum. Sit down and negotiate, go to the table and negotiate with them. I know that, for example, in Honduras, many years ago, they incorporated, the Garifuna language as a study so that they can teach the Garifuna children in school their native language, the Garifuna language, and they also incorporating not in the pace that we would like to see it, but also little by little, slowly incorporating some elements of Black history too in some of the curriculums. And I think other nations are doing the same, but you're not going to find this in many nations in Latin America. Few of them are doing it. Others are just, they just put it on hold. So how to do it, how to make sure that it happens? Again, the community needs to mobilize. The Afro-Latino community needs to mobilize to make sure that in their countries, Mexico, for example, Ecuador and Colombia, Brazil, Costa Rica, Honduras, all need to come together. The organizations, the community needs to come together and have a meeting with the people who make those decisions and remind them, here we need to include this part of the history into the curriculum so that the children of the next generation will know about it.
No, I think that's a valid point, and I think is very important for the youth to especially know these histories and to find a way to talk about it at a very young age. Now we have one last question before I turn it to Charlie. Has the Catholic Church ever acknowledged their wrongdoing regarding the initiation of slavery and the way that it was perpetrated?
Yes, the answer is yes. Like I mentioned, Pope John Paul II did acknowledge and ask the African community for forgiveness for what the church did during the time in which slavery took place in Latin America and also here in the United States. Slavery lasted over 350 years, which was 50 years less than the Israelites slaves as they were slaves in Egypt. The Israelites were 400 years lived as slaves of 400 years in Egypt, while the Africans in Latin America were enslaved for 350 years. So the church has acknowledged publicly, made a public statement about that. But I think, like I've said before, the church needs to do more than just acknowledging, saying that I'm sorry, which is an important step and is the first step to take. In my denomination, the Episcopal Church has also done similar a proclamation. Some of the Diocese of Virginia, for example, have made statements, asking the community to forgive. I think the church in Washington, D.C. as well has done similar. And other dioceses are really working hard to make a public statement of repentance of what's been done and humanity and Africans in the past. So yes, the church has done that, but the church needs to continue to do it by incorporating more and more people, Black people into their communities. Right. Hopefully one day we'll see a Black Pope, sitting on that in the Vatican and leading the church. And that will be something to see and exciting to have one day. I hope I'm alive to experience that and to experience it just like when Barack Obama became president of the United States, the first Black man president of this country. I hope to see also a Black Pope sitting there in Rome as well.
Well, thank you so much for answering our questions. And to anyone who may have a question after this, please feel free to ask in the after part of our conversation. And I'll be passing it on to Charlie right now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Farrell, and I'm an intern with Miami MoCAAD, as well as a graduate student at Florida State University in the Museum and Cultural Heritage Studies program. Thank you all for joining us during this enlightening conversation. I again encourage you all to stay afterwards for a little mini conversation. It's a great way to get more information and just speak with Orlando and Yvette. I would like to now turn it over to Marilyn Hollifield for our closing. She is the co-founder of Miami MoCAAD and a partner at Holland and Knight Miami's office, and she will be giving our closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Charlie. And wow, thank you, Orlando, for sharing history, including names that were mostly omitted from our history. And thank you, Yvette, for being such a wonderful moderator. So how many of us knew about the presence or names of Africans in the Americas as far back as the 1500s? Who were they? What did they do? Were they free? Were they enslaved? We now have a glimpse of Africans who were in South America, the Caribbean, and the United States long before 1619. Omissions in our history about South America, the Caribbean, and the United States makes calls today to say her name and to say his name resonate even louder. Again, let's thank Orlando Addison and our moderator, Yvette Rodriguez. Thanks also to our amazing Miami MoCAAD production team. First, let me thank one of our early volunteers and anchors of Miami MoCAAD, Miami MoCAAD Museum Working Group member, Michelle Johnson. Director of Interactive Media, Corbin Graves, who started the program off, and our amazing interns, Charlie Farrell, Liz Estrella Cruz, Kristen Allen, and Ashley Caleb. This was the second of our 4-part series celebrating the Afro Latinx experience. Please join Miami MoCAAD on November 4th at 6 p.m. for the creative conversation. We were there too. Barriers that blocked our contributions, featuring Orlando Addison and Miriam Dorset, an artist, entrepreneur, and community activator. The registration link is in the chat, and it will be posted soon in the website, miamimocaad.org. This conversation tonight reminds me of the words of the godmother of African-American art history, Dr. Samela Lewis. She said, "Art is not a luxury as many people think. It is a necessity. It documents history, it helps educate people, and stores knowledge for generations to come." We invite you to our creative conversations where we also seek to provide knowledge about our history, but also about our artists and their work. We thank all of you for joining Miami MoCAAD this evening. And I will turn it back to Corbin, who will provide more information about the post-conversation room, where more questions can be asked and the conversation can continue. Again, thanks to each and every one of you for spending time with us this evening. And we hope that you will support Miami MoCAAD as it seeks to provide platforms for people who are often deemed other and at the margin, where we provide platforms where we become center stage. So thank you.